so excited to be here. Hey, Karen.
Hello.
All right. Glad to have Karen back. And we're mostly glad that you are here. So let us know in the comments who you are and where you are joining from. We always love to see people joining us from around the world. So let us know. Don't be shy. Hop on in there and let us know where you're joining from, and we'll shout you out. Even if you don't want us to shout you out, I want you to let us know where you're joining from. So we're live on LinkedIn and YouTube, and I'm here with my girl Karen again, friend, colleague, actress. She wears many hats, but she keeps it real, and so that's why I have Karen back so often. But here today, we're going to talk about a great topic. And I already feel like we're going to have to do a part 1, part 2, because there's no way we're going to cover everything that we need to in one session. So yes, thank you for starting to let us know where you're joining from. We love that. Please keep it coming. Keep it coming. Oh, we've got Deepak from India. Yes, let us know. So yes, we're going to talk about microaggressions. We're going to take just a few minutes at the top to clarify what do we mean by microaggressions for those of you who might be new to the concept. Those of you who've never experienced a microaggression might be new. So we're going to just do a little bit of that at the top. But I really want to launch into our own experiences and talk about why they're so problematic, but tell you exactly what they are, like how they show up in the workplace. I mean, people aren't walking around the workplace hurling the N-word or, telling these horribly racist jokes. I mean, I don't know, maybe sometimes they are, but that's not the way they typically show up. So I want you guys to really understand what we are experiencing, what I've experienced, Karen, others, friends, colleagues. So I want you to have a sense of how they tend to show up, and then how do we need to deal with those? Why are they problematic? And then if you're a person of color, maybe who's struggling with this, we want to give you some insight in terms of how you might handle it. I got one question. It was a great question just a few minutes ago saying, how do I handle these if they're from my boss? And ironically, I kind of read a book about dealing with difficult bosses called The Unwritten Rules of Managing Up. So I'm definitely going to pull from that to provide some advice and counsel about how to handle that sticky situation. But as I said, I'm fully expecting we'll do part 1 today. We'll do part 2 next month. So if we don't cover what we need to cover today, certainly join us next month as well. So with that, let me just start at the beginning. So for those who might be new to the concept, microaggressions probably can be defined lots of different ways. I think of them as those brief, subtle slights or indignities, whether they're intentional or unintentional. That is so important, okay? Whether intentional or unintentional, that have the effect of marginalizing others, okay? Very often they can be based on race. They don't have to be based on race. It could be gender, it could be some other form of your identity. But the point is, someone is saying something or doing something in the workplace, and it's not major. It's not, calling you the N-word or, coming draped in a Confederate flag or something that's overt, but it's subtle. A lot of people describe it as death by 1,000 cuts. And an analogy that I've seen sometimes is, imagine your kid going to school and there's like a bully at the school who makes kind of like a negative comment, like every time they enter the lunchroom or every time they, come into the classroom. The first, the second day, third day, fourth day, maybe it's not that big a deal. But if they have that throughout the day, like every other day or every day, after a while, it really, really starts to demean you. It starts to wear down on you. It really does create an element of trauma. And certainly it has this element of othering, makes you feel like you don't belong or there's something wrong with you. And so even though they're micro, they tend to have a macro effect. And so that's why that macro cumulative effect. I think you hurt one thing or, one instance, it wouldn't be a big deal. But it's when it's coming at you from so many different people, different places, repeatedly. It's almost like someone described it as like one mosquito bite is one thing. But imagine if you had like 100 mosquito bites. Okay, then, that's a 911 situation. So that's kind of what we're talking about when we talk about microaggressions. And they tend to come in 3 different forms. The categories are micro assaults. Oftentimes those are more overt. It might be like a racialized joke, something like that happens in the workplace. Micro insults, something that is just feels offensive, a verbal behavior that feels offensive or is demeaning or rude. And then micro invalidations. I'm personally going to speak to micro invalidations because that's one that for me has been pretty significant. It's when you're discounting, you're invalidating, you're ignoring, you're talking over. So that's a big one for me in particular. So Karen, any comments or thoughts on that before we kind of launch into some examples to help keep it real for people?
Well, there's so many different places to go, but I just really, before we even get into examples, the same way microaggressions are small little things. A lot of people now, especially white people who are now trying to do the work, it can feel like a bunch of things coming at you too. You know what I mean? It can feel like, oh, well, I'm doing this wrong. I'm doing this wrong. I'm doing this wrong. It's not about pointing out your faults. It's about expressing things that maybe you may be unaware of. Usually they are meant as compliments a lot of times. So I think when all goes down, or if you're aware of that you've been doing something, just accept it and apologize and keep it moving. It's when we get defensive and we're unable to learn from experiences that the tension builds up. But most of the time, so many of us are so used to this stuff that if someone would be like, oh, I'm sorry, I really didn't mean it that way. I meant, I really wanted to compliment you. I apologize. The tone will change immediately and people will value you so much more for just admitting that maybe you didn't know something, so just moving forward.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, because I y'all tell me if I'm wrong, but I can already channel a lot of white people in particular who is, they might listen to some of the list or maybe read articles on this and there's listed like, 15 things you're not supposed to say. And then they feel like, I can't say anything. Like, I just won't say anything to any Black people anymore. And that's not where we're going. This is about learning. This is about, we've all had experiences just as human beings where you can hear the same thing, but then hear the interpretation from 2 completely different perspectives. And then once you get that other, maybe some of you are married and you've had this conversation with your spouse. Once you hear it from their perspective, maybe they grew up in a household where this was triggering, or they have a background where they received that differently than you had intended. But once they explain it to you, then you come to appreciate it. And you do better when you learn more. And so that's what we're talking about. And again, of course, we can't speak for everyone and we're not necessarily the authority for everyone, but we're just sharing with you our experience and sharing with you some advice. And then it's up to you guys. You take from it what you will. But I completely 1,000% agree. I'm completely imperfect as well. I think I shared on a previous session that I was on a DEI session not too long ago, several months ago, and said something, used a phrase that I later found out was not really the best phrase for that, representing the LGBT community. And I learned. I actually got a pitch that said, hey, these are like 10 phrases you shouldn't say. And I read about it. And then once I read about it, I understood better. I didn't take it as, what bothers me sometimes is I do feel, particularly from white people, there's this reflexive response like, well, I just won't say anything. I just won't, like what you're bringing up is so ridiculous that they won't even take the time to try to understand it. And so that's where I feel like the racial stamina is so low. But I at least took the time to read and understand why that particular phrasing might be offensive or problematic. And it completely shifted my point of view.
We just want everyone to know the weight of their words. And right now, as various marginalized communities. And again, we all come from some marginalized community, some
Right.
more than others consistently. But it is knowing and understanding the weight of your words. I think there are plenty of things that now that I said growing up, or whatever, that I'm like, ooh, I can't say that.
Right.
And you just have to
We're
get with that.
all
Right.
absolutely.
But
So with that, let's start, Karen, with one of the classics. The classic where they're giving you a compliment. And Karen, just tell us kind of your own experience and how that compliment sometimes comes across. We're not saying all compliments, but this is one specific one that for many Black people in particular is received as a bit
poorly.
of a microaggression.
Right. Yeah. And over a lifetime, it is a macro. And I'm going to give two examples of a white male saying the same thing to me and it having completely different meanings and accepted in a completely different way for me. And that's why it's so important for you to understand, because all of this stuff is subjective, right? So you have to understand what you really mean when you speak. And you know what I mean? You have to.
And what's the motivation behind it? It's why did you say it? It's not just what you said, but why did you say it?
So the number one thing I think for a lot of especially educated Black people is, you speak so well. What you mean, what generally white people, when they have said this to me, what they generally mean is, you speak so well, ... for a Black person.
For
so
a Black person.
Hear in my head is, you don't talk ghetto like the rest of those
exactly
folks.
You don't sound as ignorant as I thought you would.
Right. You are credit to your race, right? People don't say that as much anymore, but know, when people say that, like, that means that they're making me be something different from what I came from. You know what I mean? What I come from is a great people. We have a great ancestry.
It's excellence.
Yeah, we come from excellence. And why wouldn't you expect that from me? And
a lot of the problem when that microaggression happens is it's the surprise. It's the surprise in the voice. And we all know that it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And in this case, I think it's why you say it. And so for those who might be thinking, well, again, I just meant it as a compliment. I was just saying that you spoke well. And that may be the case. But what I would say to that is sit with, would you have said the same thing in the same way if I were a middle-aged white man who just sat down from giving his presentation? Would you also say to him, wow, you really speak well?
So
maybe not.
On that, I'm going to give you the flip side, the flip reverse, because I've been working in Georgia a long time. So I've worked with a lot of Georgia boys, you know what I mean? A lot of folks who come from, the country. And because of the way they speak, people make assumptions about their education or their intelligence. They assume that they're dumb, or they assume that they're lazy because they talk like a good old boy. And so years ago, I was a Miller Lite girl, right? You know what I mean? I was, worked as a, and we'd go out to the clubs, to the bars or whatever, and meet with the guests and everything. And, we'd always go out with a manager. And the manager of us, he was a regional guy. And he was like round the way, good old boy, fun guy, whatever. But he was far up the food chain. And when he talked to me, he was like, you speak so well. I wish I could talk like that. I wish, like, his whole thing was, if I spoke like you, people would not assume that I was dumb.
And it felt like a compliment. It felt like a compliment. You knew he was coming from a place of admiring you. And then he was even adding more onto it. Wow, I wish I could speak. And I've had that as well. I remember when I was at Georgia Tech, I was in a public speaking class and they voted like the best speaker in the class. And I got number 1. And then another Black woman who was in the class got number 2. And, so it was admiring the oratory. Right. And it came across that way.
And race had nothing to do with it.
Right, exactly.
It was just the way I spoke, not the way I spoke in comparison to the rest of those roguish folks out there talking crazy. That's what we hear. Right?
And Dr. Lee here has put this comment. She says, when they say to her, I had never met a Mexican like you. I wish they were all like you,
which goes for Muslims. My husband is Muslim, and they'd be like, oh, well, you different.
Right, exactly. And that's a huge problem and a huge distinction is too often, particularly when there are negative things that happen, when that happens, we're not viewed as individuals. We're viewed as, well, that's the way all Black people are. That's the way, Mexicans are. But when something negative happens as a white person, then it's that individual. Then there's a problem with that particular individual. It's not like, ooh, well, white people, that's how they are.
Well, on the flip side, we do kind of do that. We all do that a little bit. That's why we have these.
Well, no, but I mean, society, there's not this societal indictment. Right. There's not this. It's not attributed to your race. When we find, a white man who's a serial killer, we're not attributing it to their race a lot of times. But unfortunately, when Rollo hits up a liquor store down the street or something and it gets super publicized, there's this element of him being a Black man. And it feels like there's this indictment for all Black men.
I'll give you an example, and it doesn't fall under microaggression, but I'll give you an example of what we were just talking about. When Black Panther came out and was fabulous, and Wonder Woman came out and was fabulous, it's like they had to be fabulous, because white directors and white filmmakers get to fail all the time and make terrible movies.
You're right. They're carrying the weight of the entire culture. And this is the one shot that they have. So if it's not a success, we're not going to try that again.
We're not hiring anymore, but we will hire another white man.
Absolutely.
Mediocre. So it's not really a microaggression, but it is
very similar, to that issue.
Where we have to do well. And that's why we're always taught you have to be twice as good to get half as much. You know what I mean? Because of the perception.
Absolutely. And I want to go to Janine's question because I love this. I want you guys to get practical takeaways. So ask us these questions. And again, we always want to pivot to how can we do it better? So Janine says, what if you said we had a lot of great talks today and yours rocked? Now, I'm going to tell you how I feel about that, and Karen can tell you. Of course, all this depends on context and the relationship you have with the person. All that stuff makes a big difference. I love that. I mean, if I sit down and say, hey, out of everybody, I thought you were the best, or we had a lot of great talks and yours was amazing. No problem whatsoever, because I received that as you're saying I had one of the best presentations. The problem is, again, the sense of surprise. And it's almost, I hate to bring this up, but it almost goes back to when Biden and Obama were in the debate years ago, back before when Obama was running. And then he made the comment about Obama being clean and articulate. It's like you get a big, red, bells and whistles should go off in your head when you hear things like that. Like, why would you tell a presidential candidate, first of all, that they're clean? Okay. And what do you expect them to be? You have to be dirty and they're articulate. So that's why I think he got a lot of flack for that, because it sounded so off. It sounded so weird. So that's why I definitely don't want you, particularly as a white person, feeling like you can't say anything. What Janine said here makes perfect sense to me. Gosh, we had presentations today and yours was amazing. That's great. That's completely different from, you're sitting down and saying, oh my gosh, you can talk. Now, you really sounded good.
I'm going to give two examples though, just to play devil's advocate right here. One is going to be about the Biden example that you gave, Dana, but what Janine was asking about, I think it's great. Again, in context. Now, are you going completely in the other direction in making sure that every time the Black person speaks, be like, well, what do you think? Well, what do you think? What do you think? Because that is another thing, especially when you're in a room and you're the only Black person and some Black topic comes up and then everybody looks at you and they're like, well, what do you think? That is very uncomfortable a lot of times to manage. So again, I think we're just going to have to go back to Dana's thing about, would you be saying this to a white middle-aged man? If he was saying that, would you, that's what you need to be concerned about. With regards to the Biden thing, now this is one of the things that is difficult now. We could do a topic on cancel culture, but I do give people passes for generational stuff. You know what I mean? a 70-year-old man is not going to, I'm not expecting him to have the same understanding of nuance that a 25-year-old man is supposed to have. And there's certain things that I'm seeing now as a 50-year-old woman that my son has to, no, we don't say that anymore. Oh, okay. You know what I mean? And be accepting to it. But I do think, that's another thing, but I just.
No, but I think that's a really important, because it's all about progress. And I think that you have to progress from where you are. So, I always said, like, if you were wearing a hood last week and this week you've determined you're going to, not show up with the Confederate flag and not go to the meetings and cut up your card, and that's progress. Okay. So I'm not expecting you. Yeah. I'm not expecting you to go from the hood yesterday to, quoting Kendi the next day. But I think wherever you are, we need to keep moving forward. And I don't care how old you are. You be 200. Yeah. There's no excuse for you staying stuck in that. And we need to have forward progress.
I'll say this is a note for the Black people and people of color. And I'll say women too, because a lot of times I get frustrated with white women because I'm like, y'all should not be doing this to us when you're getting this done to you by men. You know what I mean? So,
and I'm putting Chris's comment up there because she's talking about that as well, that there is this analogous, for Black women, it's hard for us because sometimes we're not sure if we're being marginalized because of women, because we're women, or because we're Black, or because we're both. But certainly, we wish that there was more solidarity a lot of times. And women, certainly, when we talk about gender, that can be a microaggression. You could be, the only woman in the room. And certainly that can be the case as well.
And so I have to say again, though, with people of color and Black people, as we're trying to navigate through this, is that I think it's so hard to figure out what's the balance of grace to give someone. Like, there's a lot of people our age and older that are like, I'm done. I'm not even here for the conversation. And then there's the millennials and the youngers that are involved in it. So I think when we're all, if it's somebody that is really trying, and not from a place of, look at me, I'm a great white person because I'm doing this work, and we could suss that out. Give them some place and make sure that when you're starting this process, it's with someone that you can trust and they can help you, guide you through this process.
Yeah, let me make one comment on that before I go to my personal example, because someone earlier in the comments had said, how do you kind of respond, to complaining about the defensiveness. And this is something I want to offer to white allies in particular. Instead of reflexively being defensive when maybe a Black person suggests something to you or offers you some constructive criticism or shares something with you, shares a historical fact, consider this fact, and this goes to the heart of what Karen was just talking about. If we didn't think that you were fundamentally a good person with good intention, we wouldn't waste our time. I mean, so in some ways, it's almost a compliment. It's like, I wouldn't even waste my time. The only reason why I'm saying this to you, the only reason why we're having this conversation is because I do fundamentally think that you're a good person and you're trying to do the right thing. Trust me, I have so many more things to do. I'm not going to beat my head against a wall. If I thought you were fundamentally a horrible person and didn't have good intention, I wouldn't waste my breath. There are like a million
other things I could do.
And we know the blowback.
We know the blowback that occurs. There are several white people that I just wouldn't even engage the conversation with because I know where this goes, and it ends up with me being angry and then called that I'm the racist. I'm the reverse racist. I'm kind of way, and I'm like, but you came to me, right?
Right. Okay. All right. So let's go to another example. And thank you guys so much for the comments. This is exactly what I want. My apologies for not being able to get to all of them, but I'm trying to to get to as much as I can. And I know everybody's time is super, super short. So I want to try to keep it somewhat brief. But let me pick up on, I'm going to tell you guys my number one pet peeve microaggression. There are tons out there. Please Google examples of microaggressions to get a laundry list. But this is what I feel white people in particular are not going to get because they just don't walk through the world the same way that I do as a Black woman. It is this sense of being ignored and being invalidated. If we had more time, I could give you almost weekly, sometimes daily examples. It can be small things. It could be, I mean, I've had things happen that were so blatant. Like, there are three of us and we were all together for something. They shake his hand. They don't even shake my hand. Don't even acknowledge me. Like, I'm not even here. I don't even exist. Or getting ignored in service situations, or I'm standing in line, but they just come right in front of me and I'm not saying that it's always racial. Obviously, I understand that there could be other components here, but I will say to you that as a Black woman, oftentimes you get the sense that race is a major component in that. And let me bring it to the workplace, because in the workplace, the way this manifests is you're in the boardroom, you're in the meeting room, you make your comments, you're either talked over, interrupted. And again, I'm not saying all the time, okay? But you're talked over, you're interrupted, you're invalidated, or they kind of like smile at you like, oh, okay. And then they just keep going on with the rest of the meeting.
Like,
or one of my pet peeves is they'll jump in and say something to the effect of, well, what Dana is trying to say is X. As if I'm speaking Ebonics and they have to translate it for everybody else. No, I said what I'm trying to say. Thank you. I have 3 degrees. Like, I don't need someone to restate unless I've asked what I've tried to say. Now, if you want to be helpful to me, then maybe redirect the conversation to me. I would love it if someone would say, like, maybe I made a comment, but then nobody really validated it and they just kind of kept moving on. I would love it if someone jumped in and said, well, I thought Dana had a really interesting comment. I'm not sure we had a chance to fully unpack that. Dana, could you share a little bit more about that? Or Dana, I had a question about your idea. Or, I really think that could help revenue. I'd love to talk about that more. Or Dana, how are you seeing that impact marketing? Show me that respect. But to jump in and say, well, what she's trying to say is if I'm 5 and I can't say what I'm trying to say, like that's offensive.
Because you want to be, in these instances, you don't want to be a translator. You want to be a megaphone, right? You don't want to change the interpretation. You want to give them a louder voice. You want to give us a place to speak up and feel supported. Because now I know at least one person in this room is listening and supporting me. And that a lot of times is what you need.
That support is everything. So when you say, how can I be an ally? Show that support. And let me, and this
in the moment, not after the meeting and saying, oh, I really like what you were saying. Just say it in the moment.
But let me add a caveat to that, because it can get a little tricky, because I agree. I mean, one thing you hate more than anything is you're out there, you throw something out there, or maybe you've stuck your neck out and you've said something that's a little controversial, a little provocative, and you definitely want some support. And it's like crickets. And then after the meeting's over, then everybody's got something to say. Now it's too late. I needed you to back me up in the moment, to your point. But let me also put myself in the position of that white person who, let's say there's a Black woman in the meeting and she's kind of been invalidated. She's kind of been talked over a little, or maybe just ignored. Like I said, that's my number one. It's just being ignored. People act like I don't even exist. And then you want to come in and be helpful, but you don't necessarily want to take over, and you don't want to be perceived as the savior, or maybe you have very little relationship with that person, so you're not sure how it would be perceived. So my number one is say something that boomerangs it back to that person, so that, again, you're not taking the spotlight, you're not taking the kudos, you're not looking for that, you're boomeranging it back to them. And you could even just ask a question. Karen, I thought that was a really interesting point. I'm just wondering, could you share a little bit more about that? Because I think that could really be helpful. The other thing, when we talk about real time, is maybe this is kind of an ongoing issue and maybe you don't have the best relationship. You could go to that person offline and say, you know what, maybe they're the only person of color, they're the only woman, they're the only Indigenous person, they're the only Latinx person. Maybe you could go to them offline and say, I feel like you aren't as listened to as maybe some others, or I feel like you've made some good comments, but they haven't necessarily been unpacked or discussed as much as some others have. And I agree with you. I really agree with your points, and I think you're making some awesome points. I would love to help support you. What are your thoughts on that? So there's nothing wrong with just going to the person. Let's say it's a particular initiative that they're recommending or a particular point of view that others seem to not be supporting. There's nothing to say that you can't go to them offline, express your support, and then ask them how you can be helpful. To me, that's awesome.
And I'm gonna step in on this because, again, everybody isn't Norma Ray, right? Like, everybody isn't the one that's going to be power to the people. Like,
right.
And I think the point that Dana is making is that it's sometimes, again, the same way microaggressions can hurt, micro support can help. So
yes.
You want to give yourself ways that maybe you're not as maybe you think this is, I don't feel like speaking out. I don't speak out for myself. Why am I going to speak out for somebody else? And everyone's going through those changes too. But the main thing, and I'll circle this around to what is really, when we have all of these conversations, it comes back to the concept. Is it about your feelings or what is best for the other person? And that's where sometimes you got to get past how you're feeling about a situation or what that makes you feel about yourself, what Dana was saying about being reflexive. Or is this about making this situation right for this person? And if your focus tends to be outward as opposed to be as far as support and what is right to do, and not about waxing your ego to make yourself feel better, then that's where we're coming from. And it doesn't have to be big, big, big. Like, I think this is just constantly driving home. Small, constant actions have effects. You know what I mean? They or affect and have effect. There we go. So remember that.
And that is such an important point. Those micro actions make such a big difference. They're so cumulative. And for those of you who aren't following me on Forbes, please follow me on Forbes. I talk about workplace anti-racism. I talk about lots of elements of careers. I tend to highlight people who are doing big things, and I love that. But sometimes I feel concerned that people don't realize that, hey, it doesn't have to be big. I mean, you don't have to be passing a law. You don't necessarily have to start a march. You can do small things where you are, and it's amazing. It doesn't just help that one individual or that one situation, but slowly but surely it starts to change the culture of the organization.
Right.
And that over time makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
And actually, speaking of the culture, one last example I want to talk about, and Karen, you can let me know if you have any thoughts on this. And we might not think of it so much as a microaggression, but I feel like it kind of falls into that micro invalidation bucket, and it happens so often, is maybe you're the only whatever in the room, and then you get to the meeting and it becomes clear that there was a meeting before the meeting and you weren't invited.
Ooh, that was Insecure season 1. They talked about that.
Has anybody experienced that? Let us know. Let us know in the comments if you have experienced that, where it's this comment is probably going to be a little old, but where you realize that there was that pre-meeting, or it's cliquish, and somehow the person who's the only woman or the only indigenous person or the only
gay person
gay person or disabled person or whatever it is kind of not included. And that's why inclusion and belonging is so important. And that's why Beverly Daniel, Dr. Tatum wrote that book, Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? And that's why oftentimes you will see that.
Someone just made a comment. Was it Atina? Yeah, I can't really. Yes, I love that comment that she made, because that's, my son is doing it.
Let me just read. I find that when I team up with a fellow BIPOC after a meeting, we unpack what happened in that meeting, and I love that. We validate the microaggression that happened. I don't mean to say, I'm just saying that it's such an authentic experience, and I'm so glad that you shared that. We then talk about it to our white allies, on how to improve conversations moving forward, which she's talked about. And I mentioned Dr. Tatum, Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? This is what tends to happen in so many spaces, that the people of color will seek each other out for that camaraderie, for that support, because we kind of automatically feel excluded. And so what she's talking about here is oftentimes, they'll seek each other out and talk about some microaggression or something that happened that just wasn't comfortable, to say the least. But I love that she's taking it the next step, saying we then talk about it to our white allies on how to improve conversations moving forward. That's how change happens.
My son did that at his school. When everything was happening last year, he goes to a boarding school and he started an ally group. Because there were different white kids that were like, we want to do something, but they just don't know what to do. You know what I mean? And then when you're a teenager, it's hard because you're dealing with trying to understand what are your beliefs outside of your parents, your family, things like that. So I'm so interested in seeing what the next generation, how they take this. The millennials are old now, right? Like the millennials are getting old now, but the Gen Z and everything. But we did want to talk about the othering a little bit more too, about
close us out on that, Karen.
I'll use an example that's going on right now with the Olympics. And there was the Black woman, I don't know anyone's name except Sha'Carri right now, the track star. But she, I think, was swimming for Britain, for England, and she her swim cap was disqualified or whatever. She can't wear a swim cap because of whatever reasons they're doing it. And these are things that, like, especially Black women with hair and things like this that are constantly, well, could you do something? It's a constant needing you to be less of yourself because it'll make you more comfortable. You know what I mean? It will make, I'm not used to seeing all that hair, so I need you to do something about it. It has nothing to do with anything at hand, but I just want to make you know that this is different. We've never had any of this, and we don't accept it.
Right. You're different.
In some way, make it seem legit, but all the Black people and people of color are like, but white people, and this is one of the things that we need you to do moving forward, is not give coverage to things like that. Let things be out in the open. You know what I mean? Let it be out in the open. And I will say this too, we have to remember, okay, again, Dana and I, we're 50, right? So there are certain things that we have built up in our how we handle things. Our parents have built up things and how we handle things, because these are the way we navigate life to make it easier for ourselves, easier for our children, in dealing with white people who up to this point have really not known what they've done, or, you know what I mean? So I hate to be like, it is on you guys to make the effort and push yourself into uncomfortable zones, because we built up coping mechanisms that have helped us. Now, again, when we talk about generationally, these millennials and the Gen Z, like, they're not having it, and they saying it, and they've got a platform with social media to kind of put this forth and get support, whereas we didn't have that growing up. So a lot of us have built up walls, and you can't look at this as a way to say, well, I don't want to talk about it. You have got to be the ones with the hammers. Y'all got to be the ones here doing the work right now to break down the walls. We're trying, but we're still burned. Like, we've been burned in person and had things that resonate and stay with us that are just casual things to you. And that's what's bad about microaggressions, because to you, it's whatever. But to us, it's another weight that keeps weighing us down and stealing our joy. So we need you to do the effort, do the work, and not look at it as toyless. Oh my God, it's about me, because it's not about you. It's about getting through that wall.
Thank you. And the work can be small. I put part of Jared's comment up here about micro-inclusions. A micro-inclusion might be something as simple as saying, well, Karen, what are your thoughts on that? In fact, I'm reading Robin DiAngelo's new book right now, and it's called Nice Racism? And she made a reference to like a ground rule that says a person can't make more than 2 comments before everyone has at least made 1 comment, And while that might feel a little overly prescriptive, this is where my facilitation background comes in. We've used tools like that in the past just to try to balance conversation. Like, I worked with one team where each person at the beginning of the meeting would put out 3 Post-its, and every time they made a comment, they pick up a Post-it. Well, when they picked up all 3, they're done. They're considered done unless somebody calls on them, unless somebody specifically asks. And it was just a way to amplify this element of let's hear from everyone. Let's not have 2 or 3 loud voices dominate the conversation. And I'll be honest, there were many meetings where they didn't exactly even need to do that, because once you had the visual of the Post-its, it was like this big reminder to everybody to check in, to ensure that we've heard from other people in the room. So whether you do something that's a little bit more prescriptive like that, or just you take it upon yourself to try to check in with other people and make sure you've heard from other people. Now, let me just say this as a, disclaimer. Don't do it in a patronizing kind of way. I mean, nobody's saying that, Black people have to talk first, or you have to agree with anything that a Black person says. No, we're not saying anything like that, but we're just saying that we should be respectful of everyone as human beings, and we should all come to the workplace with a sense of our own agency and with a sense of mutual respect. And oftentimes we communicate disrespect when we expect people to change, we expect people to have to code switch, how to be something other than their authentic self. When we discount people, we interrupt people, we assume that what we have to say is more important than what somebody else has
more
to
valid.
say.
Yeah.
So the great news is you can combat that. I love the micro inclusions comment. It could be something as simple as, hey, we're over here huddle talking, say, oh, well, wait a minute, Jeff, maybe you might want to participate in this, include some other people, because we're all like that in terms of, I think there was a saying that said, left to our own devices, we build networks that are lazy and narcissistic. And I think we are, the closest people to us, that's the lazy component, and narcissistic, the people who kind of reaffirm us, or the people who are most like us. I think that's natural. That's not just white people, that's everybody. And I think that that's just natural. That's the way we are as human beings. But
and
unfortunately,
that's why you need affirmative action. Like that is
right,
what affirmative action
right.
is.
But unfortunately, if most of the power structure is white men, then that's when it becomes a problem, because if they build networks that are lazy and narcissistic, and so they are constantly surrounding themselves with other white men, or looking to promote other white men, or looking for suppliers that are, that are
out of my like.
Yes, I can't put my finger on it. I cannot put my finger on it. But he's just a better fit. He just feels like he's a better fit.
Yeah.
So that's what we're trying to combat. And the great news is that we can do it. So everybody on this call can do it. So with that, thank you guys. I am so grateful. Again, I know how busy everybody is. Oh, I'm always pulled in by these questions. How might we gauge the environment? I'm not exactly sure what she means by that. How do you perceive that?
When to speak up? Is it knowing when to speak up and knowing when to shut up? Like, is that
tell us, Janine, what you mean? I want to understand where we are and where to focus awareness training. I'm not exactly sure I understand.
Are you a trainer? Like, are you a DEI trainer or something?
Yeah, let us know if you can. While she's doing that, let me go ahead and give a shout out to my 2 courses on LinkedIn. If you haven't seen them yet, there's How to Speak Up Against Racism at Work. Please watch it. We're really practical. I give you really specific techniques. If you're one of those people that feels like, I've been in that moment, but I haven't known what to say, or I was a little uncomfortable with the fact that there weren't really any Black people coming up on our panel, or Black people invited to be panelists, but I didn't know how to bring that up. I give you really specific techniques for how to address that, how to speak up, how to stick your neck out a little bit. And then the other course is Supporting Allyship and Anti-Racism at Work. So they're both available now on LinkedIn Learning, and I would encourage you to access them. The latter one is really just for everybody. It's about, what can you do? What are the practical things that you can do to help advance anti-racism in your workplace? I think she's a professor But you know what? So Janine, this is what I want to do is, since we're kind of wrapping up, I'm trying to keep these under 45 minutes. Send me the question. Send me a little bit more specificity on the question. And when we come back, because we're going to do a part 2 with Karen, I want to hammer that question. I also am going to start with the question about how do you handle the microaggressions with your boss? I want to start with those 2 questions. You guys keep me honest, please, on that. I want to start with those 2 questions when we come back next month. So with that, I want to thank you guys so much. You guys are awesome. Please mark your calendars on July 20th. I'm doing an Ask Me Anything about workplace anti-racism. It's already loaded and advertised on the LinkedIn Learning platform. So please join. And in fact, Janine, if you want to bring your question there, I'll answer it there. Just give me a little bit more detail, a little bit more background. Ask Me Anything on July 20th. And I'll give you my thoughts. So thank you, Karen.
Bye-bye. Thank you for having me again.
All right. See you guys next time. You guys are awesome. See you next time. Join us July 20th.